The original Pokemon games were weird. Onix is widely known to be one of the worst Pokemon ever made. We have 3 elemental birds with 2 out of 3 typings being opposites, and the less we talk about the special stats the better. Generation 1 of Pokemon is poorly designed, except not really. I know what you're thinking, but hear me out. What if there was a reason Gen 1 has all the strange jank that makes it Gen 1? Well, that's what I'm here to show you in this video. So follow me as I explain just why was Pokemon RBY made this way. Real quick, if you like this video, then be sure to subscribe and comment to show your appreciation. With that said, back to the video. To best understand Gen 1, we first need to understand the intent behind the original Pokemon games. Nowadays, the design of these games have only become more tightly structured as time went on. Balance aside, it's clear that they've had enough time to understand what they want out of their games. But for the first ever Pokemon, Game Freak had no prior games to take note from. Even so, there were other games in which the design could be derived from. Most people know that the creator Satoshi Tajiri was mainly influenced by insect collecting, which is why Pokemon was made in the first place. However, much of the design of Generation 1 can be attributed to JRPGs. Titles such as Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, and Shin Megami Tensei were the gold standard for successful JRPGs at the time and still are today. Of course, there's only so much to glean from just saying it, so it's best if we begin to see these comparisons in more detail. But where do we start in this discussion? Well, let's talk about the Pokemon themselves. In today's world, every single Pokemon is filled to the brim with an entire list of movesets, stats, and abilities. You can argue that each of them fill a niche of some sort, though that can only stretch so far. With so many Pokemon made, it's easy to get lost in what is essentially better and stronger versions of older ones being made with each new game. Now, take this list of over 1,000 different Pokemon and condense it into a comfortable 151. With a much smaller group, we can analyze them based on intent. What do I mean by this? Well, let's take a look at the rock type. There's a total of 6 rock types in Generation 1. Both Geodude and Onix are first seen when battling Brock, the first gym leader. Meanwhile, you won't see Rhyhorn until the Safari Zone in Fuchsia City, a bit past the halfway point of the game. Within the context of RBY, rock types are made with high amounts of defense and abysmal special and speed. They are tanks in the purest sense. This design principle has been a mainstay since its very inception. What you might not know is that for the early game, these rock types don't have any rock moves until at around past level 15 or so, meaning that when facing Brock, he won't have a single stab move to use against you. Instead, he focuses on having his Pokemon be absolute tanks. Geodude only has Tackle and Defense Curl, while Onix has Tackle, Screech, and Bide. Bide is a move where for 2 turns, the Pokemon will do nothing. At the end of that, they'll retaliate and unleash an attack that deals damage equal to double what they took during the Bide period, meaning his fight focuses on tanking whatever damage you dish as he punishes you for it. Though the longer the fight goes, the more you're whittled down. At this point in the game, only about 2 Pokemon can learn moves that are super effective against it, that being Bulbasaur and Squirtle. Now, in any other game, both Bubble and Vine Whip are pretty decent moves in the early game. With respective base powers of 40 and 45 each, you pretty much make easy work of early Pokemon weak to those types. In Generation 1, however, the power of those moves were much lower, being 20 and 35 respectively. Their weakness of special moves is similar to monsters in JRPGs with physical resistance but elemental weaknesses. So, if you ever wondered why Onix is designed with stats that contend for it being considered one of the worst Pokemon, it's only because it was intended to be a literal early game boss. Plus, the reason its base stats are 385 is because if they didn't, Onix would just be too strong to act as the first gym's ace. With each new iteration of Kanto, that basis of Brock's gym feels more and more pointless, given there are more moves and Pokemon you can get early on who can easily deal with his team. Speaking of, let's talk about the Pokemon you can pick up before Pewter City. These early game Pokemon consist of normal and bug types, so let's get the easy ones out of the way first. The bug type has always been known as an early game Pokemon. Each game has a line of bugs you can find right at the start, with each evolving at an extremely fast rate. This one is fairly obvious as these are meant to represent an archetype known as the Jaken. This is a type of unit featured in Fire Emblem who is in your party from the get-go. They are far stronger than the rest and can easily ditch pack enemies by themselves. However, they level up slowly and are meant to be surpassed by the other units once they start catching up. Since the identity of Pokemon has been about catching them, it makes sense that they intended for you to ditch them later on for stronger ones. Bugs like Scyther and Pinsir are meant to be bug replacements, ones you can only get the Safari Zone. Of course, the idea of catching only to not use them later doesn't really align with modern Pokemon sensibilities. After all, people love to play with their favorites. This has always been the case, of course, but Nuzlocke have allowed people to play with that intent in mind. Now, the normal type is the one that's been pretty populated as the years went on. It's a staple to have a plethora of normal type encounters in most routes. Being the only type weak to fighting and neutral to everything but Ghost, they're essentially a balanced type. Consider that almost every Pokemon has a basic normal attack at early levels, whether that be Tackle, Scratch, or Gust before it became a flying type move later on. The classic JRPG basic attack is quite clear when you also factor that these moves have a much higher PP cap than any other. Adding on to that, have you considered why normal types can learn so many different TMs compared to any other? The identity of the normal type has been strong since its very inception, to be a jack of all trades class, not specializing in any particular strength, but having access to a multitude of abilities. If we were to compare this to JRPG turns, we'd classify them as a freelancer. A pretty good example of this is the Mount Moon Pokemon Clefable and Wigglytuff. Both of them have the ability to learn tons of strong special attack TMs, though they don't have that much of a special stat to compensate. But there's one more thing I'd like to discuss before we move on. Chansey. Out of every Pokemon on this list, Chansey feels like the odd one out. Its base stats give the impression that it's a tank. Well, if you're familiar with competitive Pokemon, that statement is pretty true. Its special stat is pretty good for the time, but its attack and defense are paper thin. Its special move, Soft Boiled, is only learnable through TM. Aside from being a tank, it's also known for one other thing, its high XP yield. Chansey is known for having some of the highest base XP yield, which sounds strange since it's a very rare encounter in the Safari Zone. Most people know this, but it does appear in the wild. The Cerulean Cave is a post-game area that houses some of the strongest the game has to offer. At that point, with no trainers left to grind, you need to rely on wild Pokemon. Chansey is the equivalent of a Metal Slime, a monster in the Dragon Quest series. These have notoriously high defense and very high XP yield. Another feature that they have is the tendency to run away, which is something that the Safari Zone Pokemon can tend to do. The name Chansey starts making more sense when you consider that it's basically a wordplay on chance, but its Japanese name Lucky is much more on the nose. It really is by chance that you run into such good luck. With all of that said, we can finally move on towards another topic of interest. Have you ever wondered why Kanto is known for having 3 legendary birds of Fire, Ice, and Electric? The type triangle of the stars makes sense, but not for the birds. Fire and Ice make sense, but Electric has no correlation with the other. In fact, this connection remains pretty prevalent aside from that. Magmar, Jinx, Electabuzz, Flamethrower, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Fire Blast, Blizzard, and Sunder. PK Fire, PK Freeze, and PK Thunder. And there it is. In JRPGs, it's very common to feature a trio of spells with said elements. In fact, it's even got its own TV tropes page, just to show how common it really is. This becomes way too on the nose if you consider their Japanese names literally just being the elements. Honestly, I could make a standalone video just on this topic alone, but I digress. I think it's time we brought up and wait a minute, this isn't a Pokeball, it's Voltorb. It's pretty common to see Voltorb and Electrode be special encounters when you attempt to interact with items in the overworld. Ever consider the fact that collectible items take form in Pokeballs? What other creature disguises itself as treasure? That's right, a Mimic, a classic staple of not just JRPGs but RPGs in general. It's a monster that disguises itself as a treasure chest, waiting for any eager adventurer to come near and approach only to chew them up with their jaws. And much like a traditional RPG, you even have dragons acting as a super rare monster that can only be countered by its own type. But in Generation 1, Dragon Rage is the only dragon move that deals fixed damage, meaning for all intents and purposes, dragon types really do act like super bosses in a sense. Lance's inappropriately leveled Dragonite, it's to show that these bosses possess things that the player normally wouldn't have access to. All in all, it's quite clear that the JRPG inspirations run deep within Generation 1's design. Though the games are still rather janky and simplistic compared to later generations, it's still the one that paved the way towards that complexity. Once again, thank you to everyone who stayed until the end. I hope with this video that you've come out with a different perspective on Generation 1, maybe even more appreciation than before. If there's anything you want to add to the discussion or something that I missed, be sure to let me know in the comments below. With that said, I'll see you all next time, and I hope you have yourselves a wonderful weekend. Peace.